Hi everybody, welcome. This is Shannon.
I'm Jaz.
And here we are again with Ask Gardenstead.
Today we have a ton of questions from the gardenstead community. Mostly we're going to talk about vegetables and flowers in the outdoor garden.
Episode 4. Here we go.
Okay, the first question is, how do you deal with weeds in your garden?
I just pull them out. I don't even use any tools. Sometimes I use a fork actually.
Oh.
I find a fork can get and sometimes the weed will get in between. The roots will get in between the fork and I kind of pull them out.
So when you just pull them without anything, are you worried that you're not getting the whole root?
If I don't get the whole root, you'll feel if you break it, then I'll dig it out.
Okay. So what's your technique? You use shimmy? Is your
Kind
soil really loose?
Well, it's always best to weed after rain.
Yes.
Because it's easier to pull out, easier to get out.
That's a great tip.
And
not immediately after when the ground is soaking, but after it's
after it's
a couple
still
hours.
Pretty damp out, but it just loosens everything up a bit more.
Okay.
That's when I weed, and I do all of it by hand.
Me too.
The more you weed, the less weeds you'll get.
Completely. So I weed with a tool. This is my go-to absolute favorite must-have garden tool. This is my Hori Hori knife. So this does everything for me. And I weed just going straight down and shimmying up a little bit, and then I pull. So I always go into the garden with a basket.
Yeah, me
because
too.
I find I will just start weeding and then I'll go and then I'll have little piles and then
Everywhere.
I'm leaving things everywhere.
Yeah.
I throw weeds out of my garden all the time thinking I'm going to get them later and I don't. So I go in with a basket and my Hori Hori and I do it all the same. I manually weed everything and I think about it in sections. So I think about it not as in, oh my gosh, I have to weed my whole garden. I kind of quarter my garden down. So it doesn't always have to be all at once.
Yeah.
I just fraction off my garden and I do what I can in my area. And I have tried laying newspaper down,
Okay.
wet newspaper, wetting it, and then adding mulch over top. So
Okay.
the newspaper suppresses the weeds and keeps the moisture down.
I think that when you plant your stuff, you have a lot more space in between. I don't.
Right.
I mean, I do with my roses. I have mulch all throughout my roses, also to keep the moisture in and to shade the root system. But yeah, I mean, just get in there with your hands. I don't use any chemicals or pesticides. And anything that you're putting in your garden, if you're putting a lot of manure and compost, it's gonna feed everything in there, which is good for your plants, but then you want to pull the weeds out.
Yeah. So manually. Are ants okay on my flowers? How do I get rid of them? We've actually, in the Gardenstead Facebook group, we've had a lot of people talking about ants this year.
Really?
Yes. So what I know about ants, my only go-to is spreading cornmeal because they don't like it.
So, to be very honest, I just brush them right off. I just brush the ants off. The ants aren't really eating the plants. They're eating the sap that certain plants produce. So, you notice peonies are always covered in ants. It's because right as the green leaves start to pull back and the flower is starting to get ready, they get sticky, the buds, and it's that sap that the ants are eating. So that's what they're attracted to. I just brush them off. I always think if a plant is producing that kind of a sap, it's because it needs it. It's part of its process. I don't want to wipe all that sap away. So I just brush them off. Ants don't do that much damage. They're annoying, but they don't do that much damage.
And if somebody had a huge infestation, one person from the Gardenstead community posted a picture of a prism. It was a little mini pyramid. And it's supposed to be I don't know if it's an energy force. No, it's something that repelled them.
Oh.
We'll post a picture.
That's cool.
Yeah, so that could be something
That's cool.
to look into if you had a huge infestation. I've never had a huge infestation.
You know what I tend to do too if I have a lot of bugs on my plants before I bring them inside, especially as a florist, I don't want to deliver with bugs. I just hold the bloom upside down and tap it.
Okay.
And a lot of times the ants and stuff, the bugs will fall out. There's been plenty of times, though, that I've cut flowers. I have them all in my buckets. I bring them inside, and I'm going through, and there's still a giant fat bumblebee, like, asleep in a Cosmo. And then I'm like, oh, now you're in my house. Like, how do I... They're so nice.
Yeah,
they're like the jolly old man of insects, I think. Big, fat, bumblebees.
We love bees, and
I love bees.
that's why bees are our logo too.
I didn't take a picture, but I finally had a few days off, and I was reading my book out in my garden, and no word of a lie, the most beautiful monarch butterfly trickled and sat on my book.
Aww.
And it was like right here, and I was like, if I move to get my phone, so I just stopped, and it stayed for about like a good 2 or 3 minutes, and I was like, this is so perfect.
So this is also a really beautiful lesson of being present in the garden. We all reach for our phones and social media, but the garden is a reminder to just really listen to the sight, to the sounds, look at everything, really like look at what the leaf looks like and smell it. Use all your senses when you go into the garden.
Okay, next question is, what's your go-to fertilizer?
Great question.
Yeah, and I bet we have different answers.
Okay, what's yours?
So I sort of take a very different approach to fertilizing. We have like a really cold winter. I fertilize both in the fall time and in the springtime.
Okay.
In the fall, when I'm planting all my spring blooming bulbs, I put a bit of a mixture of blood and bone meal in with all my bulbs, and I sprinkle it on top so that the rain's gonna get in. It's gonna do the top layer of the soil and the bottom layer of the soil. That's what I do in the fall. And then when I'm mixing all the dirt for all of my spring planting, I mix in a ton of sheep and cow manure. Yeah. I like the dirt, like when it's like, instead of the slow release pellets.
Okay.
When I'm in a pinch, I do have slow release
Chicken
hen manure.
pellets?
Yeah, hen manure pellets. You really only need to once, maybe twice a year, because we like the spring and the fall. What I do use is a mixture of fish emulsion, which I just buy easy at a garden center, and add it to my watering can. The sweet peas love it, the flowering sweet peas. And just, I think, honestly, such a good thing is if something in your garden is not doing well, I look it up and say, like, my sweet peas were really late to bloom. I looked it up and I said, like, why aren't my sweet peas blooming? And it talked a lot about if they have a really nitrogen-rich soil, they're not going to do well. Right. I didn't think I had a nitrogen-rich soil, but I put some extra blood and bone meal in there just in case to balance it out. It's not going to kill it.
No.
And it was great. Worm casings, also really, really good idea for a couple of reasons. You're going to get worms. Why are worms good for the garden? 2-part, their poop. And then the other part is they aerate the soil, which is so great. They're just swiveling all through.
Yep.
Yeah, that's what I do.
Yeah. Mine's really easy. My go-to fertilizer is fish emulsion. I just apply it in my watering can. Every couple of weeks, I feed the majority of my vegetable garden with it.
See, I didn't know how well the fish emulsion would do for veggies. I know it promotes flowering.
Really? You know what?
Really,
Some tomato gardeners, there's actually a woman where I learned a lot of tomato planting info from. She has a farm called Love Apple Farms.
Oh.
I first read this on her like top 10 ways to plant tomatoes. She puts an actual, or I don't know if she does or she just recommended it, an actual fish head in the bottom of the hole.
Wow.
And it's deep enough, so my biggest concern was the raccoons in the area would smell it and dig up. But she said it's deep enough that animals don't. But also, I was at this big conference this week, Cultivate 19.
Yeah.
And because a lot of the discussion with fish emulsion is if you're a vegan and you apply it, are your vegetables not vegan anymore? And they're not.
Wow,
same
I never
with
would have thought about that.
Cow manure,
like any type of manure.
This is a kind of a
veggies.
topic to be explored.
Mushroom compost is great.
Mushroom compost is great.
Yeah, if you're vegan.
So I met a lovely guy named Mark. He has a vegan type fish emulsion that isn't fish. It's vegan.
That's really cool.
Yeah, and it's a liquid concentrate that you add to water. So to make this really long question short, I like fish emulsion.
I like fish emulsion too. I just find manure easier because it's just like a bag of dirt.
Yeah.
It's funny though, the amount of money I spend on manure if I also started to like buy multiple packs of fish heads. Spending all our money on poop and fish heads.
I mean, that's what the garden is.
Poop and fish heads.
How often does everyone water their garden? Good question. I used to like never water my garden. I just relied a lot on the rain, and then if it was really dry, of course I would water. But the reason why I could get away with that is that when I water very deep and thorough.
Yes.
So I'm not surface watering. I'm slowly trickling the water in, and it is going deep. And this helps train the roots of, I'll use tomatoes as an example. If you train your roots, if you train your tomatoes and you water less frequently, but more thoroughly, your tomato roots are going to drive down into the soil and in search of water, and therefore longer roots equal a healthier plant. More root system, more roots, healthier plant. This year I'm actually getting way better at watering. So I rely on the rain, but I water maybe every 3 days. And then I water things that are very heavily water-based, like my cucumbers. I water them more frequently. So I'll just go out instead of the hose, which is such a chore. I have a terrible hose. It's so many kinks. It drives me absolutely crazy. I will just fill up a watering can and do my celery and my cucumbers. I actually didn't water so much that my next door neighbor, Joe, used to say, "Hey, what do you know water?" And I was like, "Oh,
Those are really good because like we just met them.
Thank you. Thanks." Yeah, I've been practicing for many years.
You're Joe's.
And so I water, let's say, every 3 days.
I water almost every day, but I'm starting to not do that. I have assistants who help me out because I travel a lot, and I'm finding it's surprising actually. I don't think people, unless they're growing their own plants, people don't understand how much you need to water, like how deeply you need to water, because so much of just like you can't just sprinkle the plant with water. Think of how deep some of these roots are. If you're getting an inch, that plant's not going to drink anything. The sun is going to evaporate that. You really have to soak the soil.
So think about it this way. If you were having a shower and the water only got to your shoulders and it didn't get all the way down to your toes,
your analogies are better than mine.
They just come to me.
That was good. That was a good one. Yeah, so what I sort of rely on actually is my hydrangeas. If my hydrangeas are a little bit droopy, they're thirsty, everything should get some more water.
That's good.
But also the other thing is don't rely on the rain if it's just raining. If it's like a downpour that you would have to pull over on the highway because you can't keep driving because it's that crazy, you're fine.
Yeah.
But if it's just overcast, that's another thing, is if it's an overcast day, it's not getting a ton of sun, even though it hasn't rained, you might be able to skip the day.
Yeah. Yeah.
A really good rule of thumb is just look at your plants and look at your soil.
Look at the leaves of the plants are really good indicators if they're a bit droopy. And then to wrap this question up, containers often need much more water than the gardens in ground.
Yeah.
Because they dry out quicker. There's less there, and it just...
And also the heat of the pot, I think, helps to keep everything the soil that's in the pot is warmer. So the water is going to be evaporating quicker.
Yeah. Next question is Donna from our Gardenstead vegetable gardening group asks, I have already gotten 2 zucchini off one plant. How many times do they produce? Oh, Donna, you're in for a treat. Zucchinis.
Oh my gosh, you're such a zucchini nerd.
Zucchinis grow almost faster than you can eat them. If you have a really healthy plant, you are going to get 12 zucchinis this year. I can't even guess that number. If you're producing and cutting and the plant is really happy, they'll be endless. This is one thing that actually is really good. A really good tip is harvest zucchinis when they're quite small too. When you see these like massive zucchinis that people are so proud of, like, look at how big I grew this zucchini. It does not taste good.
That's a really good point, really, for any vegetables.
Yes.
You don't want to harvest them at their biggest.
Yeah, it's like
they get
mealy.
They get hard. I don't know. When you see things that are grown that are humongous in like supermarkets and stuff, those are grown in very controlled environments full of chemicals and pesticides. So that's how they're getting those. They don't even taste as good as what you're going to grow in your own garden. But yeah, you'd rather have 10 tomatoes that are this big than one giant, big, humongous tomato.
Yeah, tomatoes, there are varieties that do grow that big.
Yeah.
That are usually.
Beefsteak, right?
Yes, good one.
Well, I eat them. I don't grow them, but I eat them.
And like they're meant to be big.
Yeah.
They get big. They're big tomatoes. But zucchinis, you don't need them to be huge.
And cucumbers.
Cucumbers,
Beans.
yeah, beans.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Shouldn't expect to be growing things the same size as what you're going to get in a supermarket.
Yeah, very different environments.
Mm-hmm.
Kelly asks, can someone please share how to pollinate my pumpkin? Has lots of flowers and no pumpkin. Okay, great question. And this goes for all squash and zucchini. You have to transfer the pollen from flowers. You have to transfer the male pollen to the female blossom.
Yeah.
And you can do this very straightforward way. You can get a Q-tip or a paintbrush.
I find that, paintbrushes
Or you can actually,
are super easy.
And you can remove the male flower actually.
Yeah, you can.
And all you're doing is so if we're going to use a paintbrush, you're just brushing the inside. The male part is called anther, and you're collecting pollen on the bristle of the paintbrush, and you are brushing it on the female, inside the female blossom, which is called the stigma.
If you don't have any bugs to do that for you, like any pollinators.
Yep, and sometimes the issue with squash is that the male and female flowers don't open at the same time.
Yeah.
And they're not, or you don't have them at the same time.
Just have to kind of do what the bugs would do.
Yeah, do as the bugs do.
Which veggies and flowers grow best in pots or containers?
Excellent. So we both container garden a lot.
Yes, we do. Living in an urban space, my front yard is all patio stone. So I've had to I always try different flowers in pots and in the back. So if, let's say I start 20, Cosmo seedlings, I will put like 10 in one spot and 10 somewhere else, just so that I can keep track.
I do that too with my tomatoes.
It's just the best, and then you're gonna definitely get something. And then what I have found does great in pots flower-wise are scabiosa, poppies, honeywort. I've grown snapdragons. All my snapdragons this year pretty much are in pots.
Cool.
A lot of seedlings that have like a smaller root system or don't go crazy thick with roots. I do the oxalis. I keep that in pots.
Yep.
And then separate that and bring that into the back. I actually grew my anemones and ranunculus in pots this year, or crates. So yeah, a lot of flowers will do well. Think of things, you don't want to overwinter things in pots. So think of your seedlings or annuals that you're going to get at the garden center or start yourself. They should do great in pots. Just make sure you get them in part shade or full sun or full shade, depending on what they need.
That's a great point too, is that with containers you can drag pots in and out if they're light enough, in and out of the shade.
Depending on how they're doing. The anemones it got really hot, so I put our spring blooming anemones are in the shade now and they're still blooming.
So rule of thumb-ish would be when you're planting perennials, try to keep them in
You just
ground.
don't expect them to come back after a cold winter. I've had a few things come back. I think the hardiest are like a woodier stem hydrangea. has come back a few times, but your roses, your coneflowers. I've had a few delphiniums come back in pots, but the rule of thumb is if it's a perennial, it needs to be in the ground. And if it's an annual, it should be great actually all season long in a pot.
Okay, so for veggies, you can really, truly, pretty much grow most veggies in a container, as long as it's a big enough container. I grow quite a bit of tomatoes in containers. I try to get at least a 10, usually around a 10-gallon size pot is a good thing. Unless it's a dwarf variety, then I have some tiny Tim tomatoes growing in smaller pots. Potatoes are great in pots. All herbs are great in pots.
I grow my beans in pots.
Beans are awesome in pots. Pole beans need something to climb, so you want to just put a trellis in there. Bush beans, great in pots.
Snap peas.
Yep. There really is.
You do carrots in containers.
I do carrots in containers. Yep.
That's impressive.
I love doing carrots in containers.
Herbs do great in containers.
Yep, said that one.
Actually, my chives come back every single year in a container.
That's great.
And a cheapy container, like a skinny, thin, plastic, not expensive container. And we get cold winters, like we're zone 6, very cold. Every year the chives come back.
So there's also in seed catalogs, if you are growing from seed, even if you aren't, it's good to flip through to see different varieties. Lots of seed companies are now saying right on in the catalog what is good to grow in containers. So there's actually squash you can grow in containers. They just don't sprawl out. Things that need to sprawl, often you want to give quite a bit of space to, but
yeah, that's true, actually. I think there's just been a big shift in home gardening and patio gardening, balcony gardening, that so many varieties of seeds are now, I don't know, they're fixing them somehow.
They're just adapting them for small
thank you. That was
space.
a fancier word. Adapting them for small, like pots and stuff.
Yeah. Okay, so this question is, my peas are crispy and dried up looking. What do I do? Okay, so if they're crispy and dried up looking, it means that they have run their cycle. So hopefully you harvested a lot of them and you can save some seeds. Okay, so I am snipping the dried pods off of this very dry looking plant. So my peas are fully done growing. I've been harvesting them nonstop. Peas are a cool weather crop, so they don't like this hot summer. And they're done growing. So the plant itself is really crispy and dried up, and I've let the pods dry right on the plant. They've changed from green to like a yellowish dry looking color, whatever color that is. And I'm going to save these seeds to plant next year. So once you've snipped all of the pods off the plant, this bowl will be very full. You'll want to just leave them still in their pods until about a week or two more, so they can fully dry out. You don't want to store any seeds with any type of moisture in them, or else it'll just be a breeding zone for mold and bacteria. So when you know that the seeds are ready to store, all of the individual peas in the pod would have dried up. All the moisture would be released, and you can actually rattle and you can hear the peas rattling inside, and that means they're ready for storage. So then you can open the pod and store the individual peas.
Thank you so much for learning with us. I feel like I've learned a ton about vegetable growing just listening to you talk and reading the questions.
And I feel like I've learned a ton about flower growing. And we'll see you next time.
Bye.